Okay, over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our third and final town hall focused on the potential renaming of Lee District. This process, which has spanned over several months, has included input from hundreds of community members. I'd like to thank everyone here tonight, as well as everyone who has taken the time to participate in these town hall meetings. In our first meeting, I provided a draft timeline of how we expected this process to proceed, which Matt from my team will share on the screen now. Now, while this remains a draft timeline, you will see that we have generally stayed on schedule, but I wanted to open the meeting by providing an update on where the process stands. At the next Board of Supervisors meeting on October 19th, the redistricting committee will make its initial presentation to the board on the suggested boundary adjustments to the magisterial districts in the county. That will kick off a process known as reapportionment. And as we've discussed over our previous two meetings, that is when the board has an opportunity to change the name of a district. Now, I can't definitively say when the reapportionment process will end and at which step in that process that any name change would take place, but my current expectation is that we will know the new boundaries by the end of the year and a determination on any name changes early next year at the latest. I want to be clear, I do not have the ability to unilaterally change the name of Lee District. That is an action that must be taken by the board as a whole. The process that we are conducting here tonight is about ensuring that we've had an extensive and substantive community conversation ahead of any such change, so that the board can clearly understand where the community stands. As part of that process, I do plan to make a recommendation to the board on the name that I personally support ahead of any vote. I want to be clear, I have not personally decided what my preference is, whether it be maintaining the current name or adopting one of the alternatives that we've discussed. I'm looking forward to tonight's conversation and the presentation from Chris, who is joining us again from the Virginia room to present on a pair of names that we put forward at our last meeting, Huntley and Laurel Grove. Chris's previous presentations on Lee and Franconia are available on my Facebook and YouTube pages for anyone that would like to go back and view those. After Chris's presentation, we will open it up to questions and answers, or for people to basically share their thoughts. Please start submitting your questions now in the chat, or be prepared to raise your hand and ask Matt during the Q&A section of our program. So with that, I'd like to now welcome Chris back. This is going to be his encore performance. He's done an exceptional job, so I'm looking forward to hearing what he's put together for us tonight. So thank you, Chris.
Well, thanks, Supervisor Lusk, and good evening, everyone. Super excited to be with you all again for another town hall. Tonight, I'll be giving a simple crash course overview about the names of two important historical Fairfax County landmarks, specifically unique to Lee District. Laurel Grove, the only surviving one-room schoolhouse built for Black students at a time when the whole Fairfax County public school system was segregated, and Huntley, a 19th century brick mansion house that is the namesake for Fairfax County Park Authority's largest park, Huntley Meadows. I've also brought with me tonight an army of historians and experts who are specialists on both of these topics, and they're willing to weigh in on any questions. Phyllis Walker Ford is the president of the Laurel Grove School Association, which is responsible for preserving and restoring the schoolhouse. There's also a couple of other Laurel Grove Museum team members here tonight as well. Cheryl Rapetti, who is the chair of the Fairfax County History Commission and a Huntley Meadows employee, is here, as well as Karen Sheffield, the park manager of Huntley Meadows. So with that, let's jump right into it, and I'll start the old PowerPoint here. All right, so first up, Laurel Grove. Laurel Grove is the name of a landmark school and church, which was about a mile away from the historic Black community known as Carrolltown. That was once located on Telegraph Road. At some point, George Carroll was bequeathed 10 acres to him by Dennis Johnson, the owner of his mother, Jane Carroll. And George went on to acquire an additional adjoining 121 acres at the turn of the century. Carroll sold off portions of that property to several formerly enslaved families, and a prosperous community developed. This is a topo map of the area. That's Laurel Grove School up there at the top left, and Carrolltown was up towards the right where Telegraph Road is over there. It's never actually labeled on any historical maps, but there is a historical marker, a county historical marker for Carrolltown out there today. Laurel Grove traces its name to this man, a formerly enslaved person named William Jasper, pictured here. Jasper's grandparents, Dick and Charity Jasper, were enslaved by George Washington on his Dogue Run farm. William Jasper, his wife, and 2 children were also born enslaved and emancipated by the will of William H. Foote in 1846. And they registered as free Blacks with the Fairfax County Courthouse in July 1853, and again in September 1858. Before slavery was abolished in the United States in 1865, Virginia state law required that any free person of color had to register with the clerk of the court where they resided. Those who did were given a copy of their registration papers, which allowed them to travel about the county freely and seek employment. This is the registration for William Jasper from 1853 when he registered at the courthouse. In November 1860, William Jasper acquired 13 acres from Thompson Javins in Franconia. This is an 1860 land ownership map showing where Jasper's property was, and it's just to the right of where that arrow is pointing. And just above that is William Fowle, and if you remember from our last town hall meeting, that is where the Franconia farm was. And to the left of that, you see Elizabeth Broder's label there. The Broaders family, possibly named Franconia Farm, Franconia, according to Nathaniel Lee's research, who weighed in the last time. Because there was no local segregated school for Black children to receive their education at, William and his wife, Georgiana Jasper, donated half an acre to the Mount Vernon District School Trustees in March 1881 for a school. The school trustees, however, did not provide any support, and it was Jasper, George Carroll, Middleton Braxton, Thornton Gray, and other residents in the Carrolltown community, some of whom were formerly enslaved, that provided the labor and supplies to build this one-room schoolhouse that you see here. The parents of the students also had to provide the school supplies, the furniture, and even the chalkboards. The school only had one teacher who was responsible for teaching grades 1st through 7th. And on the right there is a compilation of the known teachers who taught at Laurel Grove. This list was compiled by Jeff Clark, who is a Fairfax County Public Schools historian, and he compiled it from the surviving school records that still exist. 3 years later, in 1884, William Jasper donated another half acre for the construction of the Laurel Grove Baptist Church, which was adjacent to the school. Previously, William Jasper and other residents had to walk to Alexandria's Alfred Street Baptist Church to attend services. And to put that all into context, if you took I-495 today from where Laurel Grove School is, that's about an 8-mile drive. So that's approximately a 16-mile round trip back and forth. In 2002, Jasper's 94-year-old granddaughter, Winnie Spencer, recalled, quote, "He got tired of walking to Alexandria, so that's how we got a school and a church, because he got tired of walking," end quote. Jasper decided that the church should be built by the flowering laurel bush in the grove on his property, hence the name Laurel Grove. Unfortunately, nobody thought about taking a picture of this bush, so I don't have one to show you tonight, but I have it on good authority that you can still buy mountain laurel bushes at the local nurseries around today. This is an aerial image from the 1990s, and that's Laurel Grove Baptist Church up there at the top. The original portion of the building is that front section, and the top of the T there, that's a later 1970s addition. Behind it there is the Laurel Grove Cemetery, and that's where Jasper and his wife Georgiana are buried in Laurel Grove Cemetery there behind the church, along with other longtime families of Carrolltown. Unfortunately, though, in the early morning hours of December 20th, 2004, an electrical fire started in the basement, which completely gutted the original 1884 church, as seen here in the next day's Washington Post. There are plans to hopefully someday reconstruct and rebuild the church. And if you drive over there now, the church's foundation is still intact, although tarped over and fenced off. After 50 years of operation, Laurel Grove School closed in 1932 due to lack of students. The school building was sold in 1953 to William Jasper's other granddaughter, Alma Bushrod, and her husband, Thurman Bushrod, and they converted the school into a residence. In 1999, the nonprofit Laurel Grove School Association was formed to restore and preserve the schoolhouse and opened it as a museum in 2002. It is the last surviving segregated one-room schoolhouse built for Black children in Fairfax County. And go check it out. It's currently open by appointment, and I'm sure Phyllis can tell you more about that of when you can go visit it. In June 2009, a county historical marker was dedicated in front of the museum that commemorated the history of both the Laurel Grove School and church, and this is a dedication program from that event. So that is Laurel Grove. On to Huntley. The Huntley name traces its roots to Thompson F. Mason, grandson of George Mason IV, the founding father, George Mason of Gunston Hall. Thompson Mason was born in Gunston Hall and grew up to be a prominent lawyer, mayor of Alexandria, the first judge of the criminal court of the District of Columbia, the president for the Alexandria Canal Company, and the president for the Middle Turnpike Company, now known as Leesburg Pike. He also had many real estate holdings, including properties in Fairfax County, Old Town Alexandria, Loudoun County, and even Kentucky. After the death of his grandfather, George Mason, Thompson Mason's father, also named Thompson Mason, inherited the property that eventually became Huntley. When his father died in 1820, the property was deeded over to him. And it was around that time in 1820 that he built this brick mansion on a plateau overlooking Hybla Valley. It was a traditional house of the federal period, and the architect remains unknown, but there's been some speculation as to whom it was. This is the oldest known photo of Huntley, which dates from about 1890. Mason did own enslaved persons. According to Fairfax County personal property tax lists, he owned 10 people in Fairfax County in 1820, 16 in 1825, and 22 in 1831. These are just the Fairfax County numbers, though. Mason did enslave people in other counties and in other states. Now, although he built the mansion house, it never served as his permanent residence. He actually lived for a while in Old Town Alexandria, and that's where he died. It was rented out to a series of overseers and farmers. According to an 1826 letter written by Thompson's grandmother, in that year, the majority of those living on the property were enslaved, with the exception of the one white overseer who directed the work. What you see here is a blurry microfilm copy of the 1825 Fairfax County personal property tax list. Thompson Mason is underlined there in red, and in that year, 3 columns of numbers were recorded for the tax list. The first number, which is 16 in that column, was the number of Black adults owned over 16 years old. The second number, which wasn't recorded for Thompson Mason here, it was 0, was the number of Black children between 12 and 16 years old. And the last number there, 11, was the number of horses owned. Again, these are just the Fairfax County numbers. This is a notice from the August 5th, 1828 Alexandria Gazette newspaper, which notes Thompson F. Mason offered a $25 reward for an enslaved person named Bob who ran away from his farm. The first time the word Huntley surfaces was in this November 30th, 1855 Alexandria Gazette newspaper notice. An iron gray mare colt had strayed from Huntley Farm, and a $10 reward was offered for its return. This is the first time the word Huntley is used in a legal document, which is from November 1859. It was a deed recorded at the Fairfax Courthouse in which Thompson Mason's widow, Betsy, deeded the property to her sons, John and A. Pendleton Mason. The property transaction included, quote, all that certain tract of land in the county of Fairfax and state of Virginia called Huntley, and containing about 1,000 acres, end quote. In 1971, when architectural historian Tony Wren conducted and wrote a study on Huntley, he said the plantation was likely named Huntley before Thompson Mason died in 1838. It's possible that he followed the Mason family tradition of naming the house after either an ancestral home in England or the home of a maternal ancestor. Mason's mother's mother had connections to the Gordon family, whose ancestral home in Scotland was called Huntly, which you see here, spelled Huntly. The ruins of Huntly Castle actually still exist today, and they are in Aberdeenshire, Scotland. During the same November 1859 transaction, Betsy Mason transferred 85 Black enslaved persons to her two sons. Included were, as you see here, Daniel Humphreys and his wife Rachel and their son Daniel living at Huntly, Priscilla, their daughter, and her child named Thomas, also at Huntly, and Sandy, also living at Huntly. The two brothers ended up in debt, and Huntly passed on to Dr. Benjamin King in 1862. Before that happened, though, Union General Irvin McDowell made this map of the area, which labeled Huntly Plantation, circled there in red. The property during the Civil War was used by Union troops as an encampment site. So on this particular map, you could see that Mrs. Mason is still living there on Huntly. To the left there is Fowles Franconia Farm. Again, we had talked about that at the last town hall meeting. Just below that is William Jasper. This is 2 years after he bought the property, and close to a decade later is when he built, when they built Laurel Grove School and the Laurel Grove Church. And just below where it says Huntly Plantation, interestingly, which is now Huntly Meadows, it describes the area as a wide, fertile valley with but little timber, which is probably not something we would describe Huntly Meadows as today. And my favorite thing on the map here is they didn't call it Hybla Valley, it's called Hybler Valley. This is a survey made of the property in 1868, which then contained 997 acres when it was sold to the Harrison family. It's labeled as Huntly, and the mansion house is described up there at the top, circled in red. The Harrisons owned the property until 1946. Beginning in 1928, an aviation enthusiast and president of the Aero League of America named Henry Woodhouse started acquiring 2,000 acres of the former lands of George Washington and George Mason from 10 different landowners, including the Harrisons who owned Huntly, with the intention of building the George Washington Air Junction. It was to be the largest airport in the world and have a 7,500-foot runway, making it the longest runway in the world. The Air Junction was also supposed to be a terminal for transatlantic Zeppelins and would have a museum dedicated to George Washington, featuring various Washingtoniana artifacts. A gateway entrance was constructed that fronted Richmond Highway, as well as 3 runways, and steel for a large hangar was ordered and dumped onto the site. Woodhouse had an elaborate grand opening on March 2nd, 1929, but the venture never successfully got off the ground. Although the federal government declared the area ideal for air traffic, it was actually rather marshy and constantly shrouded in fog. This is a 1937 aerial, less than a decade after the airport's groundbreaking. And by then, the runways were already gone. You can kind of just barely make out where they were, where those 3 lines are at the bottom there of the screen. Interestingly, the airport's gateway entrance was still standing then on Lockheed Boulevard, and that's that small circle to the right there, and that north-south street right in front, that's Richmond Highway, Route 1. And at the top there, that is historic Huntly, circled in red. The majority of this property, that was the Air Junction, eventually became Huntly Meadows Park. In 1939 to 1940, the Bureau of Public Roads constructed a 2,000-foot oval test track to study asphalt design and conduct roadbed tests. This was just west of where the Air Junction was intended to be built. The Bureau used the track until the early 1960s, and in fact, a portion of it still survives. You could see it if you walk the trail off the South Kings Highway entrance of Huntly Meadows Park. To the left of it, from 1951 to 1958, one of 6 anti-aircraft artillery gun sites in Fairfax County, responsible with protecting Washington, D.C. from enemy aerial attack, operated right next to the track. If you see that upside down popsicle or lollipop there, it's the artillery guns are in that bottom circle there, and at the top there, that's where all the barracks were. It's long gone, but again, if you walk that same trail, you could still find some of the concrete foundations of that area over there. In 1956, the US Navy and Army acquired over 1,200 acres of the former Air Junction to conduct highly classified radio communications research for the Naval Research Laboratory, and did so until the 1970s. And to make a much longer story shorter, the federal government declared the land surplus and sold it to Fairfax County for $1, and it was ceremoniously dedicated as Huntley Meadows Park on April 26, 1975. The park's namesake, the Huntley Mansion itself, was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1972. 4 years later, in 1976, the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors established the Huntley Historic Overlay District to protect the house, its outbuildings, and the surrounding viewshed. The Park Authority acquired Huntley in 1989, and it was kind of in a ramshackle condition for several years, as illustrated in this photograph here, until it was renovated and restored in 2012. And you can go out there and tour it today and attend programs. And that is a brief summary of the history behind the Huntley names and then Laurel Grove.
Chris, I'll say that was very informative, just as all of your other previous presentations. So thank you for the work you did on that, and thank you for making it entertaining, and thank you for the graphics and the storytelling. Very well done.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move to the question and answer portion, or just the general statement portion of the town hall. Chris, I think you can hang out for a few minutes in case there's historically relevant questions to be answered. I am going to let people know, if you want to be able to switch your camera on, you have to accept the invite to join as a panelist. So send me a message if you didn't get that and you would like me to send that again, but everyone should be able to speak if they'd like to ask a question. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, a little hand icon. That's the raise your hand icon. If you look at Nicole Miller right now, she has her hand up. So that's what that looks like when you raise your hand. When you do that, I'll just take your name down in order and call on you. And if you don't want to ask your question and you'd prefer to type it in the chat, I'll try to grab as many out of the chat as I can. So we will give, since Nicole, you had your hand up first, we'll give you the first question. And then Gail Niddle, I saw that you had put a number of questions in the chat, so I'll call on you next. If you prefer for me just to summarize those questions for you, I can do that too, but you're up next after Nicole. So Nicole, you have the floor.
So I Googled to see where Huntley Meadows was in relation to where we live over here in the Crestwood area. And it's kind of far, right? So the first meeting we had where we discussed it, it seemed like there was a fund for Franconia. And then I must have missed the second meeting because I don't know what happened there. But the district is really weird shaped. So having half of us live in the other side of town in the Crestwood, that area, and the other half living in the Huntley Meadows area, it's going to have a disconnect from us from feeling like we're part of it based either side, whether you go with Franconia and us over here, or you go with Huntley Meadows and the group over there. My only concern is that the Huntley Meadows Park is, you probably don't want to hear me say this, but the Huntley Meadows Park is a known park for crime. There's been a lot of stolen cars dumped there. There's been a lot of nefarious activities like armed robberies and those types of things. And to me, if the park isn't even going to get cleaned up, it's sad to name the area based on that, but that is the facts. And another thing I wanted to say too is that regardless of the history of either name, any name you guys choose, it should really represent the entire community, regardless of what side of their area we live on. It should be all encompassing, and Huntley Meadows and the other, at least the other name, which I didn't catch, really doesn't encompass the whole area. It encompasses a small group of that area. And so that just should be considered. And regardless, we're still going to live here, and maybe the chances that Huntley Meadows won't be in the new district once you guys make that decision, or that might also be something you should consider when you guys make that decision. Is it going to be in, is Huntley Meadows even going to be in the Lee district, or is it going to be in some other district like Mount Vernon district? But at least pick a name that's encompassing of all people. That's all I got. I don't care. I still love living here. So whether you guys name it Lee, keep it Lee, name it Franconia, whatever, I'm still going to love living here. So appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. And I mean, I'll say this, I think this is the challenge with naming districts is that, think about Mount Vernon district. It doesn't incorporate all of its geography. Wharton is in Mount Vernon district. Parts of Richmond Highway are in Mount Vernon district. You can make the same case for Sully. Naming districts is extraordinarily difficult. And I hear the point you're making about trying to cover as much of the district as possible. So I'll make the point that that is certainly duly noted. Thank you.
So before I go to Gail next, if Gail, you'd like to ask your question, I'll just say to what Nicole just said in one of the questions that Gail raised, and for anyone who missed the last town hall that we did, the reason that the presentation this evening was on those two names specifically, because those were the two names that were requested by a majority of the participants in the previous town hall to get additional information on. So after the first town hall, Franconia was requested for additional information. Chris gave that presentation at the last town hall, and then at the end of that one, Laurel Grove and Huntley were requested. Each of those meetings is recorded and available, as Supervisor Luss said, on both our YouTube channel and Facebook page. And if anyone doesn't have YouTube or Facebook, I'll put my email in the chat and I can send you a downloaded copy if that's easier for you. So Gail, over to you, and then Rick A, you'll be next after Gail.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Supervisor Luss, for having these meetings. I would agree with Nicole that it is not representative to use either of the two names that were discussed tonight. As for Mount Vernon, I think that's of national recognition. Everybody knows about Mount Vernon. Sully, probably anybody who lives in Fairfax County knows about the Sully history. I would hope they would anyway. But I guess the first question I have is, what's the compelling need to even rename the district? We didn't see any bad association or objectionable association with Robert E. Lee, unless I missed it in that first presentation. So what's the compelling need, and how is it representative to name it anything other than that? Maybe Franconia, but.
Well, I'll say this. I mean, I think in that first presentation, it became pretty clear that there's a perception that this district is named after the Lee family. I think that perception does cast some questions about the name of the district. And you can look at, even in your own community, Gail, where Robert E. Lee High School was renamed John R. Lewis. You can also look at what was done with the Lee District's renaming of the Robert E. Lee Rec Center to, the Lee District Center. So clearly we've looked at this question in other venues, and we've also had the opportunity to hear from a number of members of this community. And I think at that first meeting, it was pretty articulately noted, that symbols matter. And we had one of our community representatives talk about, how her sons feel about going into a school that's named, with a certain name. And, I think we have to be conscious of that, and we have to, consider that. And while we haven't made a decision yet, I think the opportunity to have a conversation about it is necessary and important. And that's why we're engaged in this effort here now, our third meeting. So we'll continue to get feedback. We'll get feedback at this meeting, but we'll also take feedback before we make a final decision. So I appreciate the question, but I think we've heard from a number in our community that we should consider renaming this district. This isn't at the behest of this supervisor. It is an acknowledgement that there are many residents here who question this name for this district.
Well, I guess
Sounds-
I would also say that there are many residents that don't see anything wrong with keeping it Lee District. Now, if we called it Robert E. Lee District, that would be one thing. That would definitely be in your face. But and I think that's what it was with Robert E. Lee High School. I understand that, but just because there are a number of people who feel one way or the other doesn't mean that that's what should be done. If we're looking to nail this district's name to Robert E. Lee, then I guess that's all that can be said about it. So
Again, there's a
That's it.
perception, of that, but I appreciate the question. Thank you.
This is Tom Daly. Can I ask a clarification question?
Yeah, make it real quick though, Tom, because I got to kind of maintain fairness to everybody because we do have a speaking order. And I
Okay.
don't want to get out of control.
These two names you said at the previous meeting were, I think I forget exactly how you worded it, but for additional information. So are these two the names? Are these two names the finalists, or just names you
No.
need more information on?
No, they're names we requested more information on. So in terms of making a final list, we have not done that yet, but I think this is an opportunity for us to kind of weigh these two names as we have with both the Lee name and also with the Franconia name.
Okay, that's good to know. And also,
Okay.
I'll make it real quick. I know you said you want to move on. I
Yeah.
would like to submit a name if that's possible, whether or not that's tonight or by email. But I would like to do that.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
It's General Grant. I thought would be a pretty good name change. I don't know if anyone saw. I don't know if anyone saw the documentary that came out, I think within the last several months or couple of years, but I think it's pretty sad that he helped keep the country together, became president, a whole long list of things. And unfortunately, he's not as well known as Robert E. Lee, which he defeated in the Civil War. So I think it one, that, and then two, I also think that would, I know a couple other folks brought up that a couple of other names are too regional in terms of locality, not representing the other side of the district, but obviously that's a national name. We used to use the president of the whole country. So I think that would also help solve the issue of some part being too local. So anyway, I don't want to take up any more time for now, but I just want to get that in. I think General Grant would be a great name for the district.
It's an interesting thought. So thank you for sharing that.
I'll shoot you an email with another name too. It's not nearly as famous, but I think has the same symbolism.
Yeah. I put my email in the chat, Tom. You can send anything through, and that goes for anyone else here. If you have names that you'd like to put forward, I'll just, because there's been questions about it in the chat, and Tom asked again, I will reiterate, these are the names that were requested by this group and others in this group who may not be here tonight, but were at previous meetings for additional information. Supervisor Lusk hasn't made a decision. There's no short list. These were at the community's request, and Chris has been kind enough to basically donate his time to provide us this information. So that's the genesis of the presentations.
Okay,
Rick,
great. Thanks, Matt.
Yep, Rick A, you have the floor, and Holly Doherty, you'll be next.
Can you see me?
Rick
Can
A.
you hear me?
I can't see you, but I can hear you. Go ahead, shoot.
Maybe I'm doing something wrong on you.
We can hear you fine, Rick. So
Okay. So Rodney,
yes,
you had spoken. We met at the community walkabout a couple weeks ago, in Crestwood, and then at the
Yes.
Public Safety Sharing Hearing
right.
Committee. Oh, I think it's interesting to want to rename the community. I will say though that I loved Christopher's historical
Mhm.
lesson, because that's what it was. It's a very good historical lesson. You can't, that's precious. It's great. Because history always repeats itself. But a lot of that didn't have to deal with the Springfield area, which is your bread and butter. It's your anchor, both commercially, business-wise, business development, and that's good. That's good. And again, I heard another speaker say, "Who is instigating this?" And maybe it's a few people, but out of your total constituency population, what is the percentage that is instigating this or wanting this? And if we're going to think about that, Christopher and you guys should have also gone back. And why is our county name Fairfax? And why? Because it's Lord Fairfax. Lord Fairfax hired George Washington when he was 15 years old as a junior apprentice to go around Virginia and divide up Virginia. And that's how everything was named in Virginia. The counties and the land property owners, and we can go through this historical stuff. So first of all, before we start changing district names, well, how about this? If you don't like a slave owner, everybody was a slave owner. Hey, even black people that were freed were slave owners. That's a historical fact. So we need to, if you want to change names because somebody owns, it's a contextual issue. In the context of 200 years ago, we can't judge by our standards today. And we can't make those judgments and apply them in the day and age where we're dealing with other issues that really matter, that we need to address and spend the money on, the public dollars, the taxpayer dollars. So if you guys want to rename Lee District, name it anything you want. But keep in mind, Springfield is Springfield.
Hey, Rick, I'm going to take the metaphorical microphone back and hand it to Supervisor Luss so he can respond to that.
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean,
Sorry.
I'll say this. I think you make some interesting points about the commercial business district for Springfield. And yes, Springfield is in Lee District. So when you say Springfield, Central Springfield, Springfield Mall, a number of Springfield mailing addresses, which includes Gale Middle's community. But the problem is Springfield.
Real quick,
Springfield is.
did you see the
the-
Washington Business Journal?
Yeah, I did. I did.
Okay.
Yep, I'm very much so aware of that and have been working on that issue way before that article was written. So going back to Springfield, the issue for Springfield is that it's in another magisterial district's name. This is a little weird because Springfield District, which is basically West Springfield, is the name of the magisterial district that Supervisor Pat Harity represents. So you can't have two districts that are the same name. That wouldn't work. So unfortunately, Springfield Mall, Central Springfield, and your community, Rick, are in the Lee District because of geography, because of the way that the district boundaries were created. And magisterial districts change with reapportionment. I made that point earlier, and this has happened in many instances. We've created new districts, we've renamed other districts. It's a part of the review and redistricting that the Board of Supervisors has as a tool. And I've made this point clear that as we go through the redistricting process, I wanted to have the flexibility to consider changing the name of Lee District because that's the place that it most appropriately fits. I'm not just making a decision to rename Lee just arbitrarily or outside of a process. I'm looking at the redistricting process as a vehicle and a method for that to occur.
Okay, Rodney, but what about, shouldn't we address first, if you want to really do it right and correctly, renaming Fairfax County outside of the name of Lord Fairfax, who was the biggest slave owner and divided up the whole state of Virginia?
Well, I mean, I'll be frank with you. That issue, that I don't have purview over that in the sense that I'm the supervisor of this district. I'm not the chairman of the Board of Supervisors. I'm not the,
But you can push it.
person.
You can push it.
I certainly can ask questions about it, and I can certainly maybe look at that, but that won't be at my behest. This district is a part of the geography that I represent. There's 125,000 residents who extend all the way over to Richmond Highway on the west side, all the way up into the Huntington area just before the metro, and then as far west as going over to Green Spring Village. We have a very intricately shaped district, and from a geography standpoint, it includes a lot of different areas. It includes Kingstown, it includes Franconia, it includes Rose Hill, it includes Hyder Valley, it includes all Springfield, it includes all these different areas. So when I think about this, we certainly have to think about the entire district as well.
And one last point, I just want to let you know about, just to give you a heads up. I could really care less what you rename it. My concern is the trash and the dumping. And I don't know if you saw Fox 5, Stephanie Ramirez did a story tonight about the illegal dumping of vehicles and cars. The blight and the crime with these people with these fake tags is overwhelming. She did a story last week from Montgomery County with the police department up there. She came down here to Springfield today and went around the area.
Yes.
And tell you what, some of these people that are pushing and dealing these illegal tags, they got very heated, very
Sure.
heated. And
Can I do this, Rick? I mean, this forum is more for the name
Yeah, I know.
change.
But
I'm not trying to
these
stop you.
things
I'm going to
are-
say this. Let me make this point. I'm aware of these issues, very, very aware of them. As a matter of fact, we're working with the chief of police as well as our new station commander here, Captain Kraus. We've actually been out into the community, into Springfield to talk about this issue. I've met directly with Nicole Miller and other residents in your community. So I am as plugged in and as knowledgeable about this issue, and that we have been advocating, and the police have been doing a number of things to correct this. So the point I want to say is, yes, you're exactly right. There is an issue. We are aware of it, and we're working with the police department to come up with some solutions. And trust me, there are things that have been happening on that front, but we can talk. I would say we should probably take this offline and talk more specifically about where we are on those items. But I just want you to be aware that we are working on this.
thank you, Rodney.
You're very welcome.
Rick, again, my email's there in the chat. If you want to reach out to me, maybe we can set something up. Supervisor Lusk is doing a lot of stuff on Springfield, some things we haven't even been able to announce fully yet. So maybe we can do something like this, but focused on Springfield at a later date. So please
Super.
follow.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay. All right. Holly Doherty, you have the floor. And then Tom Sachs. I know you had a comment in there. I'm going down the list and kind of the order people raise them. So I'll give you an opportunity after Holly if you'd like to say something, Tom. Holly, you have the floor.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. I just wanted to ask a question about the government center. So in Lee District, the government center is called the Franconia Government Center. And I think most of the magisterial districts, you correct me if I'm wrong, they're named after the magisterial district. Like it's the Mount Vernon Government Center, the Springfield Government Center, that sort of thing. So I think
Yeah.
Lee District, for whatever reason, got out of sync a little bit with that. And I think since these town hall meetings started, the new government center's been announced that will be built in Kingstown. That'll be such a amenity for the community, new government center, police station, regional library.
Right.
All of that. So are you thinking that as the new government center is built, that the name of that will be the same as the district name?
We haven't made a final decision on that, Holly, but I think that would be a strong consideration, obviously. I mean, we want to kind of brand that name, and the place to do that would be in that 90,000 square foot facility. I think you're exactly right. This will be a signature facility of any of the governmental centers across Fairfax County. It'll be the largest in terms of the service offerings, and the museum will be there as well. Our office, the supervisor's office, will be located in that space as well. We'll have an adult day program and a childcare program in addition. So it's going to have multiplicity of uses, which I think will be very, very helpful to the residents of this district. And it'll be centrally located in the district as well.
To
Well,
your
that-
point as well, Holly, we've made, Supervisor Lusk has made the same point about the community center. So we're trying to incorporate that same thinking into the naming of that site.
I think that's great. I'm just so glad to hear that you're thinking along those lines.
Yeah,
And I just want to reiterate, a previous comment that, it's just not a good idea to name something after a person, because you just don't know how history is going to react to that person or how other people react to that person. And in Fairfax County, we just have such a difficulty identifying places. And the
Yeah.
geographic names that identify a place are just so helpful. And I after hearing all these presentations, Chris has done such a nice job informing us of the history. And I'm just wondering if maybe we're too concerned about the past and not enough concerned about the present or the future. And that maybe we need to shift our focus a little bit. Now, I don't know what that is, but that's the thought that's come to me, that maybe we need to look to the future and the present for a name more than to the past.
So Lusk District is what you're saying, Holly?
now,
Holly, you were outstanding. You spoke perfect. That was great.
Thank you, Holly. So Tom, I'm going to give you the floor now, and then Patricia McGrady, you're the next person who made a comment in order in the chat. I'll give you an opportunity after Tom. And then after that, if no one else has raised their hand, there are some folks who have previously spoken who have raised their hand again. I'll give them one additional opportunity if they would like to make a comment. So we'll get to those folks on the second go around if no one else who hasn't spoken chimes in. Over to you, Tom.
I'm concerned about naming it Huntley. It wasn't that significant a house that it's got the stature of Woodlawn or Mount Vernon. And from everything we were told tonight, Thomas Mason never really lived there. It was a place he was at occasionally, but he was an absentee landlord. He lived in Alexandria. So I'm not sure that rises to the level of significance that we want to give it the name of the district. My preference is Franconia because Franconia is a place. But I'd also say, have we ever looked at the name of the creeks that run through this area, like Accoting Creek or Dogue District? And there are a lot of other streams, and name it after something geographical that encompasses more of the area than just Franconia, which is a small business area. And I'll just leave it at that.
So in our, I don't know if you want to speak, maybe give us the 30-second primer, Chris. We did have a presentation previously on Dogue Creek. Could you give us a real quick reminder on that one, Chris?
Sure, yeah. So Dogue was a name that we talked about the last time. When Captain John Smith came here in the 1600s, when they first made contact with Native Americans here in Fairfax County, the name ascribed to them was the Dogue. That could be pejorative, maybe meaning of dog. It's had other spellings as well. Some people think maybe they were called the Mayumps. There's another name that they possibly call them that I can't remember off the top of my head. And then the Native Americans were pretty much kicked off the land by 1675, the latest. So yes, but there is a Dogue Creek, and you find the Dogue name in several street names around the county. Whether the Dogue were indeed specifically, there was a presence of the Dogue in Lee District. So to answer your question, not just Fairfax County, but also in Lee District, evidence has been found for that. So.
And what about Accoting Creek? We could be the Accoting District.
So we didn't do a presentation on that. I don't know if Supervisor Lusk would like to speak to it. I'm sure there's probably some trouble there with Braddock and the overlap, but Supervisor Lusk.
yeah, we would encroach in a couple of other districts with Accoting Creek as well. So I think that would be a consideration in terms of our geography versus their geography.
Okay, Patricia McGrady, the floor is yours if you'd like to have it. And then I have Kathy Rem, followed by Marianne Mulligan.
I actually hadn't thought about speaking at all because I hadn't heard the beginning of the excellent historical that Chris gave. But I do feel that some people had suggested not changing the name. I feel very strongly that the name should be changed, number one. And I guess just hearing from what all you have said, that I would pick Franconia as the line of least resistance. But I haven't studied the names at all and don't have any further opinion.
Well, thank you for that.
Thanks, Patricia. Kathy, you have the floor, and then Ed and Marianne over to you after that.
Thanks, Matt. And Supervisor Luss, thank you so much. I just would love to share a few thoughts. One, first, thank you to Chris for that excellent presentation. I found it really amusing and interesting, and I love learning about the history of our community. So I enjoyed that a lot. So thank you very much for setting this up. And Chris, thanks for your great research and presentation. I also feel very strongly that we should change the name. I live right across the street from what is now the Lewis High School. My children went there, and it was extremely exciting to me to change that name. I'm thrilled about it every time I drive by and see the new sign, and I would love for us to change Lee District name as well. For my personal thought, and maybe this is a bias because I live over on the western part of the district, but Huntley does seem very far. Like I have a hard time associating Huntley with Lee District. But when you started talking about Laurel Grove, I actually was very excited about that. It was crushing to me when I work on Fort Belvoir. So the day that I drove down Franconia, Beulah Street and saw that church burned down was devastating to me. I remember it like it was yesterday. It's hard for me to believe that it was that far away. So I was excited to hear you talk about that. Maybe if we go with Laurel Grove, we could use that as a catalyst to, make that a community project to build back the church, and increase awareness of that really interesting and inspirational community that was there and how they came to be. So thank you. Thanks for these forums. And I look forward to seeing what your choice is and what the next steps are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Ed and Marianne, over to you. And then Robin DeShields, you'll be up next.
Well, first I want to just say thank you for such a wonderful presentation. Hearing about the history of our area, it's endlessly fascinating and really appreciate that. I did want to point out that the Jasper family is still here. I knew a man named, and perhaps many of you did as well, Will Jasper, just died perhaps a year ago, named after his ancestor, I'm sure, who we just heard about. Will was a wonderful man, and he was missed. So I just thought it was worth mentioning that they're still here. Regarding whether or not the name should change, I'm from Pennsylvania, and when I moved here to the Lee District, I must say, kind of mildly embarrassed that I lived in Lee District. Wasn't a big deal to me. I quickly got used to it. Doesn't bother me on a day-to-day basis at all anymore. But I'm white. And, if I was Black, if Robert E. Lee and had fought to keep my ancestors in slavery, it would bother me a lot. And, I think we have to be as inclusive as possible. I think, we can't have a name that is offensive to so many people. So I'm thoroughly in favor of changing the name of the district. I think perhaps the most logical name to me would be Franconia, because number one, Franconia is central to the district, and it's also a fairly well-known name. I mean, given the name of the metro station and the parkway, It's a name that means something to people. As wonderful as the idea of Laurel Grove as a name would be, and I think it's very attractive in a lot of ways, it's kind of an unknown name. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
I did have one point. Once the new government center is built, it will be catty corner from the Laurel Grove School. Just a thought. Practically, like almost across the street.
That's true. That's a good
Might
point.
be I'm just fascinated by that whole story, but yeah.
On that note, I don't know if Phyllis, if you're still on the call, but if you're available and you don't mind putting your hand up when we get through the next couple folks who've raised their hands, we would like to hear from you, Phyllis, just given the increased interest that's been raised here on the Laurel Grove. So, but I did have Robin DeShields was up next. So Robin, you have the floor, followed by Nathaniel Lee, and then Phyllis, if you would like to speak, I would love to hear from you after that. So over to you, Robin.
Okay, hello everyone tonight. This is my first meeting of hearing about this discussion. I'm curious as to whether any literature was mailed out, to what outreach was done throughout the community to get input on these proposed name changes. I have seen it on the in various emails from Supervisor Lusk, but have we done enough outreach to the community for discussion? I've been here since 1994. It would have been nice to get a little flyer or something in the mail saying these meetings were going on for discussion of these name changes. Hearing the history of the Laurel Grove and the Huntley Meadows, I guess if one over the other, I'm not inspired by either of them, to tell you the truth. I mean, they both point me back to slavery, which as an African-American, I would like to get distance from that. I think those two historical places could be better maybe served by just as places of historical significance. I think we should be moving to the future and not looking back so much at the past. So I think we could do better by getting a more inspiring name. If I had to pick a generic one, maybe the Franconia, as some has suggested, or Springfield, but looking back at Laurel Grove and having a whole, I don't think that's representative of the whole area. I mean, we have Gum Springs, there's so many areas that encompass this area, and to just pick one over the other, I just don't think it's inclusive enough, and I don't think it's not exciting to me to be looking back at slavery personally. You know, so maybe just something more generic as a Franconia, or some people made reference to streams and rivers running through and stuff like that. But something that speaks to the future would just be more exciting to me. And if I could just wrap up to say, you know, what's in the name? This meeting is not about affordable housing on Route 1, but I'm going to bring it up. It's not so much what it's called, but what is representative in the area. Is the area going to represent all economic spectrums that live in this area, from the low income to the middle to the high income? Currently, land is being taken and building all these expensive housings and apartment communities on Route 1. Who's going to be able to afford to live in this area, no matter what it's called? So while we look at changing the name, we also need to look at the diversity and inclusiveness of people of all income levels and economic stratas. Thank you.
Hallelujah.
I'll say I appreciate
Please be
appreciate
respectful.
your comments, and I'll make the point that sorry, Rick. I'll make the point that we are definitely very concerned about inclusivity in the district. We're also very concerned about economic opportunities for all residents of this district. We're very focused on affordable housing. I would love to maybe have a follow-up conversation with you to talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that we are proposing and that we're working on behalf of those efforts. And I appreciate the comments you made about the two names here under discussion today. And I'll say we have done a significant amount of outreach via social media. We have brought this issue to the Board of Supervisors. It's been covered on, I think, a couple of news programs as well, the potential renaming. But I will say that, you know, we're interested in getting any additional feedback. No decision has been made. I started this conversation making that point, and it continues to be the case that no decision has been made yet on this question, but I do want to allow people to have the opportunity to reach out to me, reach out to my office, and share their thoughts as we get closer to making a final decision. So thank you for your comments, and please rest assured that this member of the Board of Supervisors is committed and have spent pretty much most of my life, when I say most of my life, my entire professional life in service to the residents here in Fairfax County and in service to those who have been left behind and underserved in many, many ways. This is a personal thing for me. So thank you.
Thank you.
Robin, I've put my email address into the chat. If you'd like to send an email, or if you don't email, if you, I guess I can put our office phone number in as well. If you want to call or email, I'd be happy to set up a meeting so you can discuss this in more detail with Supervisor Lusk. Next up, we had Nathaniel Lee and then Phyllis. So Nathaniel, you have the floor.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say thank you again to Chris for a wonderful presentation about the area. I personally think it's important to remember that our district represents a lot of people, that we need to be inclusive. And so that's one reason that I recommend that we look at changing this name of the district, because regardless of who the district may or may not have been named after originally, there is a perception that carries a negative weight, and we need to consider that in our community. And we should certainly consider place names that are known in our community. For example, the Franconia name is not just in one neighborhood, but also runs along a 5-mile road all the way from Telegraph to Springfield, and is the name of one of our subway stations. So there is something to be said for looking at names that can be inclusive to everyone who is in our district.
Thank you for that series of comments.
Thanks, Nathaniel. Phyllis, you have the floor, and then Tammy Sheffer, you have the next comment if you would like to make a comment after this. Over to you, Phyllis.
Thank you, Matt. And Chris, thank you for your wonderful presentation. Let me just say that I'm a descendant of William Jasper that Chris talked about in his presentation. But I also grew up in Franconia. Our house was located at 6830 Beulah Street. And that property had been in the family from 1860 until 2000. And while I would like everybody to come visit us at Laurel Grove School and we could share some of the additional history. The years that I've spent growing up in Franconia is really important to me. So while I like and love Laurel Grove, I would recommend Franconia.
Okay. Wow, Phyllis, very interesting. Your commentary, if I were to have thought about this in advance, I don't know if I would have thought that you would have said that. So thank you for your transparency and thank you for your openness there. That's
Well, I want everybody to come visit us at Laurel Grove, but Franconia, everybody in my family that grew up in Franconia, you never forget it. No matter where you live, Franconia is still home.
it's compelling. Thank you.
Thank you.
Phyllis. Appreciate you. Tammy, if you would still like to make a comment, the floor is yours.
Hi, I was just commenting to say that I do strongly support changing the name from Lee District, and I appreciated learning the history of the names Huntley and Laurel Grove tonight. Of the two, I do find Laurel Grove more inspiring. It's being named after not only a landowner or large property of land, but the school that was built to serve the community. And I do also support the name Franconia as well.
Thank you.
Okay, great. We are a little bit over time, and I want to be respectful of everyone who has logged in for this tonight. I know there are a few people who've already spoken who wanted to speak again. If I put all my contact information in the chat, if you wouldn't mind sending along your follow-up comments, and I'll make sure Supervisor Lusk gets them, and we'll
Can I
get
get
back.
1 minute, please?
Rick, I'm really sorry, Rick. I'm really sorry, but you probably already had more time than anybody else. So Rick, I put my
Rick,
contact
be
info in the
quiet.
chat.
You've already spoken.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to insist, Rick. I am sorry, just to keep it fair for everyone, but I did put my contact information in the chat. Please follow up. We appreciate you. So Supervisor Lusk, over to you.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say thank you to everyone who took the time to come out and be a part of this discussion. And again, this was a very fruitful and deliberative conversation. I want to thank again Chris from the Virginia room for his exceptional presentation this evening, just as I said earlier, similar to the other ones as well. We will continue to take comments, so please feel free to send those to my office. You can reach us through the contacts that Matt left as well, or you can reach us at leaddist@fairfaxcounty.gov. That's our email address for the office. Happy to receive any thoughts, suggestions, or comments that you'd like to share in advance of a final decision. But I will be clear in saying if we get to a place where we're going to change the name, I will be making some public dissemination of that. The board will also be a place where I will announce the intended name in advance of the meeting that the name would be selected. So just so everyone has a awareness and has opportunity to know what we are considering for the name change, if we proceed with the name change. So with that, I'll say thank you to everyone and good evening.
Thanks, everyone. This also will be available as a recording and posted up so people can review it later, or please share with others in the community. Have a great night.
Good night, everyone.